Welcome to the Aurora Public Library District's three-part series, New Wave Memories. We begin with Part 1, Pump It Up, Roots through 1978. Warning: try looking for a simple definition of New Wave music. I dare you. Given the variety of influences of later offshoots, any examination of the sources on the internet will leave you breathless and running for the nearest exit. As a result, these presentations will be a mix of information and personal observation from one who was there, who loved the music, and bought a lot of these records. Even coming up with a time frame for the genre is problematic. There are those who contend that New Wave didn't end until 1986 with the rise of hip-hop and rap. I remember a conversation I had with a former roommate in 1983, in which we were talking about MTV and the songs being promoted there. At the time I had to ask, is it still New Wave? Frankly, I didn't think so. And this survey will most likely conclude at the end of 1982. As I pull out more of the CDs of music from the mid-70s to, well, whenever, the time frame covered may be subject to change. Also, there's no way to cover everything in these relatively short presentations. I'll try to give a good sampling of the best, and at the end there are links to YouTube videos of a lot of the music and artists mentioned. And so, let's press on. Music of the 70s was quite a stylistic hodgepodge. The decade started out well enough, but by 1973 even I could tell that the sound of records was changing and not necessarily for the better. For the next few years, the Billboard charts were dominated by bland pop acts like Barry Manilow, John Denver, about as threatening as the Muppets with whom he frequently appeared, Tony Orlando and Dawn, the Captain and Tennille. This list could go on forever. For my money, a lot of this music was the next best thing to garbage. Next, you had all of those flash in the pans like Donaldson and The Heywoods, the Starland Vocal Band, a John Denver spinoff, yuck, and Blue Swede's Hooked on a Feeling, blah. Thanks to the above two trends, the music of the era had become so squeaky clean and sanitized, it's no wonder a backlash was waiting in the wings. In addition, you had the growth of arena rock, characterized by historian Gary Donaldson as big voices, big hair, and really big guitars. Here you had acts like Kiss, Queen, and Boston. Now, let's throw in the often excessive, bloated progressive or art rock bands. I remember once talking with some people about the group Yes, and I remarked, there's more energy in the 2 minutes and 19 seconds of She Loves You than in the entire genre of art rock music. Their reply, well, that's rock and roll. It sure is, baby, it sure is. And then there was disco. Remember Disco Duck? What more needs to be said? It isn't that there wasn't good music being released, but too often the best offerings of the era simply did not command mass radio appeal or big sales. I tend to think a great deal of the massively popular songs from 1974 to 1978 were just tacky. Raise your hand if you truly would like to hear Kung Fu Fighting again. Thanks to tripe like this, I downgrade the decade's music when compared to the 60s and the 80s that bookended the 1970s. So it was high time for a revolt against this radio pablum. Enter four young men from Queens, bored by the current state of music, who decided to call themselves fictional brothers and start a band named the Ramones. Joey Ramone characterized 70s music this way. Everything was 10th grade Led Zeppelin, 10th generation Elton John, overproduced, or just junk. The Ramones put together songs to be played fast and loud. Their first concert drew an audience of 5, but the word spread, and once the rock critics began writing great reviews, Sire Records signed the band to do an album. The result, Ramones, was recorded in 7 days on a budget of $6,400, and it charted at Billboard at number 111. Despite the relatively low sales, the punk revolution had begun. Others, also looking with disdain at what was commercially successful, entered the fray. Acts like the Patti Smith Group. Lead siren Patti Smith has been labeled punk's poet laureate thanks to her combination of self-penned poems and music. A major fan of French poet Arthur Rimbaud, she was introduced to his work, via a book she shoplifted. Smith has been honored by inclusion in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and even was named a commander of the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres by the French Ministry of Culture. Then there was television, who also followed the new punk music trend, incorporating avant-garde jazz inflections in their answer to the Ramones. Together, these three acts fashioned a rawer, rougher, and more politically charged new genre that became even more ubiquitous once that ethos crossed the pond. Over there, the Sex Pistols expanded on this gospel, and they unleashed themselves on an unsuspecting public. Their brash, no-holds-barred songs and performances scandalized the more conservative elements of British society, but enthralled many disaffected young people like themselves. And the Sex Pistols were the catalyst behind the formation of other acts, such as The Clash. Joe Strummer of the group said of his first Sex Pistols concert, "I saw the future, with a snotty handkerchief, right in front of me." One early music critic cited The Clash as the first group to come along who can really scare the Sex Pistols. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees in 2003, Rolling Stone magazine ranked The Clash number 28 in their survey of the greatest artists of all time. Next up, The Damned. They were pioneers for releasing the first punk single and album in the UK. The group was led by singer Dave Vanian, who adopted a vampire-esque stage persona that would become massively influential on the goth movement later on. Plus, you gotta love a drummer who called himself the Rat Scabies, and Buzzcocks. According to the band, there was no "the" in the name, which comes from buzz, describing the rush of playing live, and cock, a Northern European English term for friend. Buzzcocks were the second punk new wave act to form their own, albeit briefly lived, record label called New Hormones. Later signed by the United Artists, their first release, Orgasmatic, was banned by the BBC. So, all three of these acts place a lot of importance on their first exposure to the music and manic performances of the Sex Pistols, whose songs, like Anarchy in the UK, number 38, God Save the Queen, number 2, Pretty Vacant, number 6, and Holidays in the Sun, number 8, were socio-political dynamite, and somehow became big hits in the UK despite almost universal radio bans. Pistols lead singer Johnny Rotten, commenting on the erupting madness, says, "I don't understand it. All we're trying to do is destroy everything." Nihilistic, violent, volatile, offensive, and crude. The Sex Pistols' self-destruction was inevitable. Their career together lasted only 2.5 years. EMI Records signed them in October 1976 and then dropped them just a few months later. The British arm of A&M signed them on March 10, 1977, but by then the group was so out of control they were shown the door 6 days later. Virgin took them on after that, and the label released everything from God Save the Queen on out, plus the resulting album, Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, which charted at number 1 in their homeland and squeaked onto the American charts, peaking at number 106. Johnny Rotten, increasingly alienated by the infighting encouraged by their manager, Malcolm McLaren, announced his split from the group January 18, 1978, and took the other three members at that time, Sid Vicious, Steve Jones, and Paul Cook, would go on to record sporadically, often not together anymore. Vicious became infamous when he was suspected in the murder of his girlfriend Nancy Spurgeon, and he died of a heroin overdose in February 1979. Despite the band's enormous influence, the negative publicity their antics generated gave punk rock a bad name. Here in America, the mayhem guaranteed that any record labeled punk would receive little, if any, airplay. Moving right along, there was another camp of acts who regarded the current music scene in Britain and America as complacent and creatively stagnant. These people were intrigued by the spirit and visual style of the punk rockers, and they took that style as a template, adding pop hooks to harness punk's power in a more appealing guise. This offshoot became known as New Wave in a nod to the French film genre of the same name. The music club CBGB in New York became an early outlet for American bands, both punk and those wishing to explore a hybrid synthesis. Originally a dive biker bar, the venue was purchased by Hilly Crystal in 1973, and by the following February, CBGB, which stands for Country, Bluegrass, and Blues, began booking bands to perform on their minuscule stage. All the New York scene's punk and nebulous new wave acts played there. Acts like Television, 94 performances. The Ramones, their first live gig was at CBGB on August 16, 1974, and they'd appear another 86 times. Apparently, the average time of one of their performances was 17 minutes. And the Patti Smith Group, 62 appearances, represented the punk end of the bookings alongside the Cramps, with Lux Interior as their lead singer and his then-wife Poison Ivy on lead guitar. The group premiered a new subgenre of punk labeled psychobilly, thanks to the music roots in 50s rockabilly stylings. They would perform 35 shows. The Dead Boys from Cleveland were frequent headliners. Often considered one of the most violent of the punk bands, they would release 2 albums during their career, Young, Loud, and Snotty, and We Have Come for Your Children. The Mumps, 26 shows. And Richard Hell and the Voodoids, 21 shows, whose lead singer had split from Television. Hell became something of a punk fashion icon with his spiked hair and his torn or cut clothing held together by safety pins. Punk fans would enthusiastically adopt the coif and rush out to buy lots of safety pins in emulation. While newcomers like the Talking Heads, 84 performances, and Angel and the Snakes, later Blondie, 70 shows, were honing their chops at the club. CBGB also hosted the first U.S. concert by one of the seminal British punk bands, The Damned, whose New Rose beat the Sex Pistols to the punch to become Britain's first punk single in 1976, peaking on the UK charts at number 81. In effect, CBGB was to punk and new wave what Harlem's Apollo Theater had been for rhythm and blues. When CBGB closed its doors in the mid-2000s, the awning over the door was acquired by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in recognition of the significant part the venue played in providing these acts and more with a springboard to more public attention. Over on the West Coast, Los Angeles wasn't about to let New York have all the glory here. A punk scene developed in the City of Angels, led by the Nerves. Jack Lee, Peter Case, and Paul Collins formed this short-lived group, and they released a 4-song EP in 1976 before going their separate ways. Later, Blondie would cover 2 of the songs from this EP, Hanging on the Telephone, a UK hit, and Will Anything Happen, an album cut on their Parallel Lines disc. At any rate, the Nerves were the catalyst behind other acts like The Germs, The Dills, The Zeros, who were Latino punk, and the Weirdos. Later bands like X, The Knack, The Beat, and the Plimsolls, the last 2 fronted by members of the Nerves after that band broke up, added to the California roster. One contributor to the madness erupting in LA was KROQ-FM, an on-again, off-again station that would play anything, and the second these punk new wave acts had a record together, it was off to KROQ, where DJ Rodney Bingenheimer would introduce these bands to local listeners. In other pockets around the country, Memphis boasted the Scruffs, who recorded in their home city's ardent studios, once home to cult faves Big Star. Village Voice music critic Robert Christell wrote of the Scruffs' first album, Wanna Meet the Scruffs, "Only a sucker for rock and roll could love this record, and I am that sucker." In Akron, Ohio, Devo was making some noise. Devo is a shortened form of de-evolution, a concept inspired by the band's perceived dysfunction that ran rampant in American society. After appearing in a film, The Truth About De-Evolution, David Bowie saw the movie and began working to persuade Warner Brothers to sign Devo, which did happen in 1978. Elsewhere, even Toronto, Canada got into the action with the Diodes, who formed at the Ontario College of Art and Design University. Within 3 months, the Diodes were opening for the Talking Heads. In June 1977, the Diodes and their manager opened Toronto's first punk nightclub, Crash and Burn, but the club was closed before the end of the summer thanks to complaints about the noise from the Liberal Party of Ontario, who shared the building. Back in England, another outlet for this new music was provided by Dave Robinson and Jake Rivera, who established the independent label Stiff Records in 1976. One of its slogans touted Stiff as the world's most flexible label. Other slogans include words banned by the FCC. Early signings include former British pub rocker Nick Lowe, The Damned, Elvis Costello, Ian Drury, and Devo. Many of the punk new wave acts who were making some noise, literally, but couldn't interest any of the major record companies would end up on Stiff Records. Lowe got the label's first release, numbered by 1, with So It Goes, a single that sold 10,000 copies in England and managed to bubble under the Hot 100 in the States at 109. The Damned's New Rose came out on Stiff, and in 1977, the label inked a distribution deal with Island Records, then under EMI's banner. The deal didn't last, and Stiff then turned to Columbia Records, who were already handling Lowe and Elvis Costello albums. By 1978, internal dissension among the owners of Stiff caused a split, with most of the artists currently under contract heading to Radar Records, and Ian Drury, who was just beginning to make it big in Britain, became the main star of the parent label. Before the aforementioned Sex Pistols, a handful of other acts records were beginning to see some chart action in England by 1976. The Damned, as mentioned before, are credited with the first punk new wave single, With New Rose. Eddie and the Hot Rods cracked the top 40 with Teenage Depression at number 35. This band took its name from a dummy stage prop at their early shows. After retiring Eddie, they simply called themselves the Rods. Even more singles were getting decent airplay by 1977. The Stranglers' Get a Grip on Yourself peaked at number 47. The Stranglers went on to an impressive 40-year career that netted them 23 UK top 40 hits. Described as genre hoppers, their music evolved into art rock and early goth. One critic pointed out that the Stranglers were responsible for music that may have been ugly and might have been crude, but it was never, ever boring. The Motors, who signed to Virgin Records in May 1977, had a near hit with Dancing the Night Away at number 42. The Clash broke into the British top 40 with White Riot at number 38. Generation X formed from the ashes of a group called Chelsea when William Broad and 2 other members walked out mid-gig. Broad transformed himself into a peroxided, sneering lead singer who called himself Billy Idol. The new band hit number 36 with Your Generation. America's Television performed even better, peaking at number 30 with Marquee Moon, and the Ramones outsold them all with Sheena is a Punk Rocker, number 22. To date, Sheena was the only record to make the U.S. Billboard chart thus far, with a 13-week run and getting up to a whopping number 81. Rocket to Russia, the band's third long-play release, included this song and stalled at number 49 on the Billboard charts. Joey Ramone blamed the lack of better sales on guilt by association, since Americans were getting a taste of the outrageous behavior of the Sex Pistols, and, well, many were turned off punk music by the excesses of the British band. The Boomtown Rats from Ireland had 2 UK top 20s in 1977. Looking After Number 1 was a hit at number 11, and Mary of the Fourth Form peaked at number 15. The band named itself after a gang of children mentioned in Woody Guthrie's autobiography. Led by Bob Geldorf, a former writer for the New Musical Express, Geldorf would achieve worldwide fame through his involvement with Band Aid, the 1984 charity effort to relieve starvation in Africa. He has since been knighted for his work in this field. Two other British success stories were courtesy of the Stranglers, who ranked up 3 top 10 singles. Peaches, number 8, Something Better Change, number 9, and No More Heroes, number 8. And Susie and the Banshees scored a number 7 hit with Hong Kong Garden. The London Times once called Susie and crew one of the most audacious and uncompromising adventurers in the post-punk era. One last newcomer band in England was The Jam. Their first single, In the City, cracked the top 40 across the pond. This was the beginning of an impressive run of 18 consecutive top 40 hits by a band influenced by The Who, The Kinks, The Beatles, and Motown. They would chart 3 more songs before the end of 1977, All Around the World, number 13, The Modern World, number 36, and a remake of the Kinks classic David Watts, number 25. The Jam's commercial winning streak only ended when the members decided to call it quits some years down the line. Surprisingly, despite the great popularity they enjoyed in their homeland, the Jam never made much of a noise here in the States. 3 acts besides the ones named above managed to scale the UK top 10 in 1977. Eddie and the Hot Rods reached number 9 with their follow-up to Teenage Depression. This song, titled Do Anything You Want to Do, peaked at number 9. Nick Lowe, one of the first acts signed to Stiff Records, got up to number 7 with the David Bowie-inspired I Love the Sound of Breaking Glass. Lowe, actually signed by the label to act as an in-house producer, helmed albums by Elvis Costello and Graham Parker before turning to recording his own material. One of his most famous compositions is What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding. The Tom Robinson Band, named for their openly gay leader, climbed to number 5 with 2468 Motorway. And reflecting how quickly the band's fortunes changed, Robinson once said, "Within 9 months, we'd made the transition from signing on at the Medina Road Dole office to the top of the Pops, Radio 1, EMI Records, and the giddy heights of the front cover of the New Musical Express." In 1977, they were voted the best new band at the Capitol Music Radio Awards. So, by this point, things were looking up commercially, over there anyway. Now on to Declan McManus. Inspired by the look of Buddy Holly, who entered the new wave scene in a suit and tie and pair of large horn-rimmed glasses. Renaming himself Elvis Costello, in many ways, he may provide the definitive dividing line between punk and new wave. His debut album, My Aim Is True, featured songwriting of a higher caliber than anything so far in the movement. The songs are angry, sharp, literate, and full of smart twists and sly puns. He released 3 singles, Less Than Zero, Allison, and The Angels Want to Wear My Red Shoes, before his 4th shot, Watching the Detectives, broke him in his homeland and charted at number 15 for 2 weeks. The album itself was at number 11 in the UK, and despite nary a hit in sight, My Aim Is True even cracked the US album chart, landing at number 32, as a result of Costello's appearance as a musical guest on the December 17, 1977 episode of Saturday Night Live. If there is a king of new wave, his name is Elvis Costello. When asked for the motivation behind the songs on My Aim Is True, Costello replied, "Revenge and guilt." The angry but nerdy persona he created inspired countless other bands to adopt his mannerisms and look, and now dozens of the new wave bands were appearing in suits and ties as well. Many tried to ape the clever wordplay of his songs, with more middling results. One factor helping to spur sales of punk new wave singles, particularly in Britain, was the creation of promotional videos, a practice that would soon become ubiquitous. It is thanks to these early videos that we can see some of these acts performing their songs in the period in which these seminal recordings were made. Moving on to 1978, Costello charted 3 more singles, I Don't Want to Go to Chelsea, number 16 UK, Pump It Up, number 24 UK, and Radio Radio, number 29 UK. None of these made the Hot 100 in the US. He also released one of the all-time best new wave albums with this year's model, a recording that hit number 4 in his homeland and number 30 here in the US. He was beaten out, however, by the American band Blondie, 2006 inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who have sold 40 million records worldwide. Blondie managed to cull 4 British hits during the year, 3 of them top 10s. Starting with the gender-flipped Denis, a remake of the 1963 hit by Randy and the Rainbows, the record spent 3 weeks at number 2. The band followed with an original, I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, number 10, then another self-penned song, Picture This, number 12, and a cover of The Nerves' Hanging on the Telephone at number 5. The Boomtown Rats cracked up 3 big singles in the UK, She's So Modern at number 12, Like Clockwork, their first top 10 at number 6, and Rat Trap, which earned its place in history by becoming the first ever British number 1 by an Irish group. It was also the first punk new wave single to top the chart. Another recording that cracked the British top 10 in 1978 was quite an oddity, credited to a Belgian artist dubbing himself Plastic Bertrand. The words are actually sung by the song's composer, Lou Debach. The piece was called Ça plane pour moi, sung entirely in nonsense French. The title phrase is an idiom meaning, This Life's for Me. The song hit number 8 in England. Other acts were getting more attention as well. Buzzcocks scored with What Do I Get, number 37, and even better with Ever Fallen in Love with Someone You Shouldn't Have Fallen in Love With, number 12. The Undertones from Northern Ireland hit with Teenage Kicks at number 31. Their music was described as a mix of adolescence, angst, and heartbreak. The Brazilios, who broke up 4 months after the release of their first album, hit number 17 with Top of the Pops. The Tom Robinson Band had a second hit with Glad to Be Gay at number 18, despite being banned by the BBC, and The Jam was back with Down in the Tube Station at Midnight, number 15. Drury and The Blockheads had the biggest new wave single of the year with Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick, number 1 in Britain and Australia, and even number 79 here in the US on the dance charts. Nick Lowe released an album of very skewed songs satirizing current popular music trends, and it pointed out the difference in attitudes between British record companies and their American counterparts. His Jesus of Cool was a number 22 hit in the UK, but Columbia Records here, fearing a potential backlash over the title, changed it to Pure Pop for Now People. The album charted at number 127 in Billboard. Other chart actions stateside, including Plastic Bertrand's Ça plane pour moi, landing at number 47. The Ramones were back with 2 more near hits, Rockaway Beach number 66 and Do You Want to Dance number 86. The Talking Heads made their debut appearance on the Hot 100 with Psycho Killer, number 92, probably aided by an appearance on Saturday Night Live. 2 new wave songs managed the seemingly impossible feat of cracking the American Top 40 before the end of the year. The Boston outfit, The Cars, scored with Just What I Needed, number 27, and My Best Friend's Girl, number 35. Not surprisingly, both charted much better in England at number 17 and number 3, respectively. By this point, there was a clearer delineation between punk and new wave musical styles. As indicated before, new wave was folding in more pop hooks, synthesizers were frequently used, and many of the songs took an ironic and even slightly twisted look at pop culture. The songs were edgy, upbeat, and highly danceable, which opened the door for the music in some of the urban discos of the time. Many of the early videos of the new wave artists were being shown in the clubs between actual disco songs, and these films helped spur some popularity with the crowd that would lay the groundwork for more chart action in the following year. This concludes the first segment of New Wave Memories, Pump It Up, Roots to 1978. Be sure to join us for Part 2, New Wave Memories, Let's Go, 1979 through 1980, where we take a fond look at new wave music from those years. And now it's time for me to shut up and let the music do the talking. What follows are links to several YouTube videos of the songs and artists mentioned thus far. These videos will tell you worlds more about the music than any write-up could possibly do. Watch and enjoy.